Welcome back to the IE427 garage, everybody. We are back on the Mark IV prototype, and we're working on wiring today. All right, so wiring. Because the two harnesses, both the Coyote control pack wiring and the chassis harness, kind of work in tandem to one another. I like to do both at the same time. Now you can do one then the other, but what I like to do is kind of get all of the harnesses laying in place so that I can see exactly how the two are going to be married together. Each of the generations of Coyotes are just a little bit different. So if you remember, we just finished with a Gen 3. And although I like to get my chassis harness through the firewall in a particular spot that suits my style of building these cars a little bit better, when it comes to the routing of the Coyote control pack wiring, I generally go by the Factory 5 recommendation. The reasoning that I do that is because the harness is only so long. And if you do it according to the Factory 5 instructions, chances are pretty good you're going to be able to get all of the plugs and connectors to reach. So on the Gen 2, this is the, I believe this is the latest updated version of the Gen 2 wiring. And I pulled this off of the factory5parts.com website. I've said this before, go to instructions, click down to the particular part or assembly you're looking for, and there are PDF files on all this stuff. So the suggested spot in the latest update for the Gen 2 Coyote is to bring the Coyote control pack through the firewall right here, which is right next to this dash support. So on the outside, or the inside of the engine compartment anyway, you'll see it's right here. I peeled back the tape for the position that I want the fuel pressure regulator to be in. If you remember in a previous video, I said I marked this with some masking tape and I put an arrow where we had mounted the fuel pressure regulator on the 25th anniversary car. And I'm going to put it in that spot because everything just reaches. Basically, the angle at which the fuel line and fuel return, supply and return, are going to come into the regulator will go right into that spot, and then out of there into our fuel rail for the Gen 2 Coyote is going to work perfect too. So I'm not going to mount it as low as it is there. I'm going to mount it just a little bit higher, but that position on the firewall right to left is where I'm going to mount it. And like I said, you can see where the Gen 2 Coyote wiring comes through. We are going to use the bracket that came with the kit, which is this piece right here. It's got the Factory 5 logo in it. I don't know if you can see that right there. And I'm missing some hardware. Now, I said this in the last video. I think we lost a box. A box that had some critical and some very non-critical pieces in it, hardware. So I'll pick this stuff up locally. I've got that to mount and I got the fuel pressure regulator to mount. So I'm probably just going to pick up some stainless hardware in 1/4 inch and make both of those sets of hardware match one another. Normally I have that kind of hardware, but I've been using up a lot of it on this car. Like I said, I don't know what happened to a lot of the hardware. I'm hoping that it was just all in this one box. Now, I may stumble upon it. It just may be that the stuff wasn't with the particular assembly that it went with. So, for instance, for this bracket right here that I'm using for the fuse box for the Gen 2 Coyote, that was in all of the panel hardware. And so I haven't come across that loose hardware anywhere or in a package or a plastic bag anywhere. I did pull out a bunch of the hardware that was with all the electrical stuff. So you can see I've got the switches here. This 2-position switch, I think right here, is what Factory 5 was using for the windshield wiper assembly. This is before they went to that parking switch, so I'm going to go over this with the car owner and see if he wants to upgrade to that switch. But we've got a bunch of toggles in here. This is the one for the hazard lights, so we're going to be using that one. A lot of these single pole switches here, or even this 2-position, this is an on-off on. I'm assuming that is for the right and left turn signal, so we're not going to need that. This is an on-on switch. This is the one that you would normally use for the high beam. We're not going to be using that. So I was expecting that hardware to kind of be in here, and it wasn't. So what I'm going to do is make a trip to the hardware store tomorrow, pick up some extra hardware so that I have it on hand. I've got quite a bit of 5/16 hardware. I just don't have a whole lot of stainless 1/4-inch stuff. Or it's just mixed. It's all different sizes, and the head style doesn't match, and you kind of see where I'm going with this. So I want it to match. So even if I just get standard button heads in 1/4-inch, I want everything to kind of match. So what I've done is I've got all of the harnesses that I think I need through the firewall. So right here you can see this is the main chassis harness. This has got the alternator feed wire in it. It's got the fuse panel feed in it. There's actually a couple of those. It's got the starter wire circuit in there, which we'll probably not use. We'll probably end up cutting this back and not using it. But I've also got the rear chassis harness coming through there, and I've got the gauge harness that goes to the engine through there as well. And then the last thing today was the Coyote control pack wiring, which I put through the firewall here. So I got the computer mounted, and again, I put this in the suggested spot that Factory 5 recommends. Now, we did have some issues with this location for the Gen 3 computer, which was quite a bit bigger. What we were having problems with is this back corner of the computer was making contact with the bottom of the body. And so we ended up moving this about 3-4 inches forward in order to not have this make contact. Now, this right here is the lowest portion of the valley of the hump of the fender. So I don't think we're going to have any problems here. The one for the 25th anniversary, it actually stuck up from here, and I think that's where we ran into issues. So what I've done on the Gen 2 harness is I've dyed out all of the wires and connectors that we're not going to need. So Factory 5, even in the instructions, tells you, you're not going to need this, you're not going to need that, and then shows you, how to, cut them out and tape the ends of them. I go a little bit further in that what I do is once I open the harness and cut the wires, I bend them over themselves, and I kind of flatten the wire out, and then I put a piece of shrink tubing over them. Now, since they're in the harness inside the split loom, I generally don't use the shrink tubing with the adhesive in those locations because it's shielded from anything. It's not going to get water. It's not going to get anything like that in it. So I'm just keeping those wires in place, and so I just want to safe them off so that they're never going to make contact with metal or anything else and possibly short out. And what I'm doing with all those connectors is I'm putting them in the Ron Francis box. So the box that the chassis harness came in, I'm putting all these connectors. So for instance, this is the one for the intercooler pump, which we're not using. Where's the other ones? Here, I've got, we took out this relay from the chassis harness because we're not going to be using the factory relay inside of the Ron Francis harness for the cooling fan. I've got the oil pressure sensor that we took off the side of the block in here. So you kind of get it. I'm just trying to save all of those harness connectors that are on the end so that one, the owner has an idea of what we've taken out of the harness, and two, if let's say he decides to add a supercharger, well, all he's got to do for the intercooler pump is open up the harness in that spot and then connect that harness back in, that connector, and he can wire up an intercooler. So I try to make it as foolproof as I possibly can. Now, one thing we're going to do in this chassis harness is the same thing we did on the 25th anniversary car. We're going to utilize the mega fuse. I think it's a mega fuse. It's not a, it's a mega fuse, not a maxi fuse. It's definitely a mega, because I think it's a 150 amp fuse. We're going to utilize that to also protect our Ron Francis harness. So the battery power coming in is going to go through the mega fuse, and then on the other side of that fuse, we're going to have the chassis harness and the Ford control pack. After talking with the guys at Ford Racing, they were very helpful when we were doing the 25th anniversary car. They said they didn't see a problem with doing it that way. The only thing they cautioned us against is not tying the alternator feed or return, because you're actually bringing power into the harness from the alternator. They said it probably wasn't a good idea to feed that through the same fuse. So they said to either bypass that portion or to add another fuse. We chose to just bypass it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do this one the same way. We're going to come straight off of the alternator to the feed side of that fuse so that it's feeding power directly to the battery and not through the fuse. So this way, everything on the other side of the fuse, the Ford control pack and the chassis harness, are both protected by that 150 amp fuse. If there's ever a short in the alternator or there's ever a short in the battery, the fuse will blow and it'll protect the electronics inside the car. So that's what we're doing there. I've also got to start working on getting the cooling fan circuit. Now the cooling fan circuit, I rewired a lot of this stuff here. So for instance, in the harness, let me see if I can get this to cooperate a little bit. Inside of this harness, this is the one that ties into the fuse box from the Coyote control pack. There is a couple of wires in line right here, one of which goes down to the starter. So you heard me mention that we're not going to be using that starter wire in the Ron Francis harness. This is actually the starter wire that is the call for start in the Coyote control pack. And then this wire is a feed for our cooling fan. So I'm gonna double check this, but I think this wire, I think the fan in the Mustang is rated for like 40 or 60 amps, something like that. Regardless, our fan isn't going to pull that much. It's probably going to pull 30 to 40 amps. This wire is going to be fine for that. So this is the one we're going to send up to our cooling fan. And then in this portion of the harness as well, we had some loose wires that were for CAN bus. So we had a yellow and a white with blue tracer on it that were for CAN bus wires. The yellow was a key-on circuit for the CAN bus, and then we had the CAN bus actual info wires or whatever, signal wires. That was tied into that harness as well. So we pulled those out because we don't need them for this particular application. But again, if the owner ever decides that he wants to control some CAN bus circuits, they're right here in the harness. He'll have this video so that he can know exactly where they are. But we capped them off in here. And if at any point down the line someone wants to tie into those, they're here. And we're going to save that pigtail that was coming out of the harness so that they'll have it down the line. So what I'm working on the rest of this evening is just trying to get all of the wiring kind of in place. So you can see I've just got tie wraps holding it in place towards the front of the car, and then I've got some tie wraps to hold it across the front of the car. I just want to make sure that I have enough harness to do what I want to do to get the entire harness in place. And generally I wire all of the stuff in the front underneath the radiator. The factory 5 instructions tell you to run it across here. I don't like it to be visible in the engine compartment, so I bring it down to the bottom, which means I'm really close as far as the split loom on this side. But generally what I do, since the wires are long enough, is I'll just extend this split loom a little bit, and then it'll be fine. Now we are going to have to pull out these cooling fan circuit wires. These are for the Ron Francis harness, so these will be cut and capped, and they'll be put into the split loom just like we did the ones for the control pack. The rear harness, as I said, is coming out the front of the firewall. And what I'm doing on that one is I've just got it loosely strapped. What I'm doing on that one is I've just got it loosely strapped in a couple of spots going down the tunnel, and then I've just got it routed back here to the back. So the tail lights on this side are tie wrapped up there, and then over here on the passenger side, I've got the same thing. I've just got them tie wrapped in place. And then, of course, the fuel pump wires and what have you are right down in here, and so those are all ready to go. I've got the wiring for the license plate light just hanging here now. What we'll end up doing is we'll end up drilling a hole back here behind the rear passenger side roll bar mount, and those will come up, and they'll go across the tube here to the hinge, and then up and into the trunk, and they'll be tied in when the body goes back on. One thing I'm going to continue to do is to relocate our inertia switch over to the passenger side of the car. It's just way too crowded over on that side of the car with the turn signal switch, the headlights, and all that kind of stuff in order to put the inertia switch in on that side. And so I'm going to continue on all the builds that we do to relocate the inertia switch over to this side of the car. Now you can see where the wires came through for the Coyote control pack. It's very convenient for the main ground to go right in there. As I said before, this isn't our first Coyote engine. This is our second or third Gen 2 Coyote. So I have a pretty good idea of where all of these grounds are going to land. When the fuse box went in, I made sure to extend the ground wire so it would reach the ground stud, which we have already got in right there. And I wanted to make sure I did that before I put the harness in the car. So I believe we're going to still put our headlight switch over here, since we're going to be doing high and low beams on the turn signal stock. That means the only thing we'll have on this panel is going to be the headlights and the hazard switch, I believe. But that one we're just going to kind of play by ear until we get a little bit farther along with the build. I think that's going to do it for tonight. I'm going to clean up the shop a little bit before I go in the house. It's cold and rainy here today, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to pick up all my tools for today and kind of get the shop back in order. I've had a pretty hectic schedule the last couple of days, and so I'm just going to kind of take it easy the rest of the day, get some tools organized, get the shop cleaned up a little bit, so tomorrow night when I come out here I can kind of get a fresh start and start getting a lot of these connectors and everything kind of in place, and see where I'm at. I'll see you tomorrow. All right, little music update. ZZ Top, LaGrange. So tonight I am continuing work on the Coyote control pack wiring for our Gen 2. But I had a little sidetrack this afternoon when I got home. I wanted to get some of the wiring kind of done and in place over on the passenger side because I wanted to move forward with the brake reservoir. So this meant the brake reservoirs had to go in. So I went upstairs, I grabbed the brake reservoirs that we got from Mike Forte, and I made a bracket. So you can see I made some, I made a bracket out of some, I think this is 2 by 3 inch aluminum angle, and I mounted the reservoirs with 3 of the nylon lock nut and socket head screws that Mike provides. And then in the top, I recessed some flathead Phillips head. These are stainless steel machine screws. And then I cut the one right here short so the 2 bolts don't interfere with one another. So I don't know if you can see that right there. So they're close, but they don't interfere with one another. And then I got the reservoirs mounted. So they're in, and I still need to get some fittings ordered for the bottom, because these are 6 ORB AN to 6 AN fittings coming out of the bottom, and to try to adapt that 6 AN AN fitting at the bottom to a 1/4 inch hose is nearly impossible. So we're going to swap these out for a 6 ORB to a 3 AN, and then the 3AN will have a female 90 with a 1/4 inch barb on the bottom. And so I found those on Jeg's website. And so I'm going to send that over to the car owner, and then he should be able to order those up for us. And we'll have those, and then we can get the reservoirs all plumbed up. So I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to come out of the bottom here with the 90s, face them towards this side of the car, put a hole right here through the front of the footbox, because there is no secondary steel right here, so I can come right through here, and then into the barb fittings of our Wilwood master cylinders here. So once I got that in, then I could start working on the cushion clips for our front chassis harness. So you can see I used the flat portion of our reservoir mount right here to mount the first cushion clip. And then I've got one under here. Now I did mount this to the bottom side. I don't know if I can get you in there to see it. So I've got this mounted to the bottom side of this 3/4 inch rail. So it's virtually invisible from the engine bay side of the car. And then I put one here, and then this one goes right into structure. This is part of the brace for the hinge assembly right here in the front. So I've got that right into that brace, and I'm going to wait on any cushion clips out here or anything across the bottom of the radiator for right now until I'm a little bit farther along with the cooling fan wiring and stuff like that. So that part is done. So then what I did is I came over to the passenger side of the car, and I wanted to get the fuse box for the Coyote control pack mounted. And so following the instructions in the Factory 5 assembly manual, I put it in about the right spot where they suggest. I did space it back from this edge just a little bit because it was kind of tight in here. I've got a O2 sensor that's got to plug in here, and so I just gave it a little bit of room. And then the last thing I did tonight was I mounted this mega fuse, and that's going to protect our Coyote control pack fuse box. It's also going to protect our Ron Francis harness. So I'm going to bring all of the Ron Francis harness feed wires to the fused side of this mega fuse. And then I'll bring the alternator and the battery to the other side of it. So if anything ever were to happen, the fuse would blow, and it would protect all of the sensitive electronics within the computer and anything else that might be in the car. Now, if you notice, I did take the ECU off of its mount just because it was going to be easier to get in here without it in the way. Once I get some of this all squared away, then I'll go ahead and I'll mount this permanently. But you can see I've got battery cables to run, so I've got to run a jumper from right here over to the fuse box here. I've got a battery cable to run from here down to the starter, and then I've got all of those Ron Francis wires that are going to either tie into here, or like I said, the alternator, which is going to tie into there. So I want to get all those done before I put this in permanently. And I think it'll make it just a lot easier to deal with all that. Now, I did have the computer in when I did the Gen 3 car, and it did make things in here a little bit more difficult to work on. And remember, on that car, we had a heater and we had a wiper motor. Now, this one, we're just going to have a wiper motor, so it should be a lot easier than the last one. But I think that's where I'm going to end this video. And we'll carry on with the Coyote control pack wiring and more of the chassis harness probably in the next video. But that's kind of the way this goes. Once you get into the wiring, it seems like everything is wiring. And I did have a little sidetrack with the brake reservoirs, but still, the main focus is on the wiring. We need to get the wiring under control. We've got a turn signal switch to wire up. That should be coming any day. We've got the trailer light converter that is going to wire our taillights. We have decided that we're going to go with the LEDs in the back and ditch the round lights. So those are going to have to be wired in. So we've got a lot of wiring on this car, similar to what we had on the 25th anniversary car. So if you are enjoying the content here, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.